guys, Han here. Welcome to the second channel. And today we're going to be talking about why I think the two foreign members of NewJeans are leading the charge on NewJeans' side, and why I also think this is completely intentional and planned for. If you haven't been following my coverage of this whole saga on my main channel, then you can check that out up here. Otherwise, let's get into it. So we have to start this conversation off with taking it back to our favorite person, Miss Min herself, Min Hee-jin, right? And this actually goes back to a conversation I had with a friend all the way back when this all began, like around April, May last year, where my friend who, just to give you some background about my friend, she studied media and communications with a focus in journalism at uni. And she pointed out something that I thought was very, very interesting. And honestly, coming back to it now, I totally think she was right. Bearing in mind, some of you actually, I'm sure a lot of you really don't really know who Min Hee-jin is beyond her being the creator of NewJeans, right? But actually for old school K-pop fans, especially second gen, she has quite the reputation, for better or for worse, for being good at her job, but also a bit weird, a bit inappropriate, a bit, how do you, comment c'est quoi, Kim Soo-hyun-esque, if you will. And she's worked obviously in SM with some really big idols. She worked with EXO, she worked with SHINee, she worked with Red Velvet, she worked with FX. And while as a marketer, I will give her flowers, she's good at her job, she's also very problematic. And so she kind of had this negative reputation from when it was first revealed that she was leaving SM and going to, at the time, actually Big Hit, but soon to be HYBE, right? Because I believe she actually joined Big Hit, or they offered her the contract in 2019. Don't quote me on these numbers. I'm just off the top of my head. But Big Hit didn't become HYBE until 2021. And mind you, when she was hired, a lot of fans, a lot of like old school K-pop fans were like, that's not a good move. But the thing is, and this is the crux of the thing here, a lot of Big Hit fans were international fans who came into K-pop through BTS. So they didn't really have a deep understanding or deep knowledge of other parts of the industry or things prior to that. Things prior to the third generation, right? Because BTS is technically a third generation idol. Whereas for those of us who did have a second gen or first gen knowledge of K-pop, we were like, I don't really, something smells disgusting. And we weren't really too happy about Min coming over to HYBE. But when it was revealed later that she was coming as like a branding officer for all HYBE artists, people were like, well, she's good at what she does, so hopefully she'll do that with no problems. And then finally, of course, as we know, it eventually led to her deciding to be a CEO instead and take over NewJeans and this, that, and the other. But the real question here is, why did she pick HYBE, right? And this is what my friend was bringing up to me. She was like, why do you think she picked HYBE? Because obviously HYBE and SM were enemies to some degree. And she said that she left SM because she and Lee Soo-man were not getting along. She wanted to do her own thing and the company didn't want to support her. Lee Soo-man was against what she wanted to do. But we also know that during the whole like SM acquisition thing with Kakao, that Lee Soo-man was kind of buddy-buddy with Bang Seok, more so to spite SM and to spite his nephew, but still there was a relationship there. So if she was leaving because she couldn't stand Lee Soo-man, it wouldn't make sense for her to go and work with his friend, right? But what does make sense is that if she wanted to leave behind her past in SM, like the kind of like stained past, shall we say, going to HYBE, where the majority of fans are an international audience who don't really know her, would be the ideal situation. She could basically start with a clean slate where she could make a new image for herself, and also she could, in a way, be she could be more low-key. Of course, when then NewJeans became a thing, she wanted them to be promoted as her group. HYBE also wanted to promote them as her group. But honestly, I can say that I saw a lot of people didn't really think, who is she? They just thought like, oh, well, if they're promoting NewJeans as her group, she must be someone. She must be significant, even if I don't personally know her. So I think that was kind of like why she approached HYBE. It's like a chance for her to start from scratch and rebuild her image with a new audience. And ultimately, as we said many a time, she's good at her job. Like, I know people really don't like whenever I say that, whenever I give any like positive comment to Min Hee-jin, but I'm just calling it how I see it. Like, as a marketer, I think she's good at what she does. As a branding officer, I think she's good at what she does. Even if it's not revolutionary, it's good. Like, it's good. It's just objectively, she was successful at what she set out to do, right? And now if we then add in this whole situation that's happened, assuming we're going by her original plan, which was to usurp Adore or NewJeans out of Hybe in the first place, right? And I honestly believe she came into Hybe with not this exact plan, but the intention to use their resources, make a name for herself or make something for herself, and then leave the company. Because she even said in her, I believe it was October, Hyundai lecture, that she wanted to make her own company, but she didn't want to put her own money into it. And she didn't want to work for somebody else because she wanted to have full control. So I think she saw opening a company in Hybe as a way for her to make her own company using other people's money and then in the long term take it out of there, right? But ultimately she would have had to know that once she did that, there was no way she could continue as normal within the K-pop industry. Like, even if her plan wasn't fully exposed to the public in the way that it was through the audit and all that kind of stuff, I think those within the industry would have learned that she's not really trustworthy. So she would have to basically rely on that international fan base that she's made for her future, right? Basically, she wanted to set herself up with an international fan base so that by the time she was left in a situation where she had to exit the K-pop community, she would already have people waiting for her. So now the question is, how does this now apply to NewJeans, right? I'm not going to give Minhee enough credit to say that she thought this far ahead in terms of like, oh, I'm going to have a girl group called NewJeans and one day they're going to ruin their careers in South Korea, so they're going to have to leave. Like, I don't think it was that far ahead, but I think in the back of her mind, she's always had this exit plan to go global, right? Or international. And I think now with NewJeans' situation, she's kind of extended that plan to them where that's the only option they have. Because realistically, the 2 interviews they just did, they have burned bridges. And it's very interesting, you know, I was speaking to a student about this today. For those of you who don't know, I currently work in adult Hagwon. I teach business English, but with some students, we free talk, right? And I had a student who knows that I like K-pop, knows that I'm covering this, and she's very interested in the NewJeans case. And she came to me and she was like, you know, after seeing their articles, particularly the BBC one, she was like, I really dislike Hanni. And I was like, interesting that you say that, because you're basically saying that all the negative things that were said are said by Hanni only, or that she's the only one who's responsible, right? When NewJeans themselves have been saying, oh, we're a group, we make all our decisions together, why is it only Hanni or Hanni and Danielle who are getting the flack, right? I think there's a number of things that need to be considered. Firstly is a backup plan. We know that, like, by them criticizing Korea, criticizing the K-pop industry, they're basically trying to cut ties. They're trying to separate themselves from that. And like I said in my main video, they're being very naive if they think the Western music industry will sweep them up and accept them just because they've basically gone, oh, we're not really K-pop artists, you know? Like, yeah, we started from K-pop, but we've transcended beyond that. We don't agree with the K-pop system. We're too good for that. We're real artists. Like, that's what these articles are giving. It's trying to paint them as people who are truly involved in their creative process. I did see a comment where somebody said this. It's like, to appeal to the Western audience, the whole ignore me thing it's not going to fly, right? That's not going to be good enough reason for them to do all that they're doing. So they have to go down this line of like, oh, we want creative freedom, we want our freedom of expression, we don't want to be controlled by what is already known as this toxic, manipulative, manufactured K-pop industry, right? And I think they also think that by separating themselves from K-pop and also having 2 native English speakers, like, doing all the public speaking for the group, that's going to, in a way, like, de-foreignize them, like, make them more familiar, basically. Like, let's be real. We all know how the Western media or Western audience who don't know anything about K-pop, who aren't really open to other cultures like that, would react to a non-native speaker trying to speak English and do interviews and do shows and all this kind of stuff, right? We've seen it with K-pop groups. We've even seen where K-pop groups have native speakers and they're like, oh, your English is so good. So I think having NewJeans introduced to the Western audience with Danny and Danielle, 2 people who speak English natively, makes it feel like, oh, these are just girls who for all intents and purposes, look Asian, but they are American or they are Australian or whatever it might be, right? Like, it's going to make people a bit more open to giving them a chance because they see them as like us, right? Another thing as well is that it would sound very disingenuous to have the Korean members disrespecting and criticizing their own country, their own culture. Like, yeah, of course we can do that, but I feel like it would sound really stupid for these Korean born and raised K-pop artists to be like, oh, we signed up for K-pop and we didn't really know what it entailed and now we don't like it. Like, I feel like that would come across just dishonest. So I feel like in a way it has to be the foreign members who can kind of have that like Eurocentric, like foreign supremacy of like, oh, well, you know, we who come from our civilized Western countries, we went there thinking that, oh, no, like dazed by the glitz and glam of K-pop, but when we got there we realized that, oh, it's hell on earth, like it's everything that people say it is, you know? And I feel like that narrative is much easier to sell. And then obviously the final and honestly I think most important thing is that if this like break into the Western music industry doesn't work, they have to be able to come back. The Korean members need to be able to come back to Korea. And I think that students' comment of, oh, I hate Hanni now, I think that was like proof of it working, because even though this is something that they are collectively saying, that they're a sentiment that they're collectively promoting, it came out of the mouth of the foreign member. Therefore, that is the person who's responsible, right? And I feel like even though that student is like interested in K-pop, I don't consider her like a real like stan, if that makes sense. She's a fan, not a stan, if that makes sense. And I feel like stans are going to see through that. Stans are going to be like, no, you're a collective, you're all responsible. I feel like a lot of you guys are seeing it already where you're saying like, why is it the foreign members? The fact that you even notice that is because you have that like differing viewpoint. But I feel like for the average Korean person, it's very easy to just blame the foreigners, basically. And that means that if or when this all like comes crumbling down, the two foreign members can just leave, you know, they can just be on their merry way and there's not really a problem. But the Korean members always need to have that in. They need to know that at the very least, they can come back to Korea and participate in society. Whether that's actually true or not, I don't know. Personally, and this is not to sound insulting, I think all the girls in NewJeans are pretty, but I do think that I do think that the three Korean members don't have a distinct enough face. Maybe Minji, but I feel like they don't have like a crazily distinct face that if they were to go back to being normal people in 5-10 years, people would still recognize them. I feel like they could very much assimilate back into society if they really wanted to, if they really had to. Although, of course, there's always going to be those one or two fans or sassings who like keep on top of them, because that's the other thing as well. I did make the comparison between Kim Se-ron and this situation and her not being able to work even like a coffee shop in my main video, but I think the slight difference is that Kim Se-ron had a very long career. She was a very well-known face of the Korean people, and she was still technically like actively active as an actress at that time. It's just that she didn't have any work, like she didn't have any gigs lined up. Whereas I feel like in this case, if NewJeans were to go like three Korean members of NewJeans were to go back to being like regular people, the environment would be slightly different. Honestly, there's pros and cons to that as well, because on the one hand, if they're like regular people, they can kind of ask like, don't treat me like a celebrity anymore. And you might think that's crazy, but it has happened. Like there have been cases of people who've retired and gone and got like regular office jobs and just lived and worked like that. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I know there's a second gen K-pop artists who did that. But on the flip side, it also means they're not afforded the same level of security and things that a K-pop idol would have, like bodyguards, all this stuff. And realistically, assuming like if it ever got to this, it would be after they've lost the lawsuit to Adore, probably after Adore has sued them or they've paid the termination fee to leave themselves. I don't think they're gonna have the money essentially to hire those extra things for themselves. So ultimately the point that I'm making here is that they have to push that kind of negative attention onto the non-Korean members because they have an out, because they have an escape route. Whereas the Korean members, if they're smart, if their parents are actually like protecting them for once, they have to leave that door open, that if all of this fails and worst case scenario happens, we just cannot be celebrities anymore, we have to be able to live in Korea as people. There's also the case, I can't remember the name of the guy to save my life, but there's a case of a K-pop artist who was actually banned from coming back to the country. The scenario was a bit different. It was because he didn't want to go to the military, and I think he renounced his Korean citizenship and kept his American one so he wouldn't have to serve. But that was seen as like a massive slight to the country, especially because of how popular he was. And then they basically said, you can never come back here, which, I mean, that's their prerogative, I guess. I don't think it will ever get to that case with NewJeans, but if they wanted to, they could take it there, if that makes sense. Ultimately, this is just my little conspiracy theory, but I do think Min Hee-jin always had the intention to go global or go international, and I think honestly this complex con performance was a tester as well to see how much hype they could potentially drum up outside of Korea. I think they started with China because it's nearby, it's somewhere that they know is familiar with K-pop culture or like fandom culture or things like that, and K-pop music. But I think long term their goal is to go to the Western industry, music industry, because realistically that's where the money's at, isn't it? Whether that will actually work out the way they want it to, personally, I have my reservations. I wouldn't bank on it. In fact, I would put money against it. But time will tell, right? If it ever comes to that. And ultimately, I just think that they're pushing this responsibility of speaking out and criticizing K-pop and Korea onto the foreign members to protect the Korean members, essentially. Because I do think once the foreign members leave Korea, they haven't really lost much, if I'm honest. So while I don't agree with it, I understand it. I hope that makes sense. I'm not justifying any of this, by the way. Anyway, that's all I have to say. I'm interested to hear if you guys agree with my little conspiracy. Are we wearing the foil hats together or nah? Or do you have different ideas as to why you think it's the foreign members who are doing most of the talking, the shit talking specifically? If you do, please leave them down in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video or you thought it was interesting or whatever, then leave a like. I'd appreciate it. And if you'd like to see like more scripted, not less off the cuff and more actually informative, not just conspiracy theory content, then you can check out my main channel, The Haniverse. Anyway, this has been Han from The Haniverse. I will see you guys in the next one. I feel like that's not my outro. But secondly, I feel like I need a new outro for this channel. What do you guys think? But for now, thanks for stopping by.